Please.
Okay,
The middle seat.
here we are. We're talking about investing, cryptocurrency, ICOs. We've got a great panel, people who do this all day, every day, real experts. You know who these guys are. Howard Linson is famous in his own right, founded various successful companies like StockTwits. Edith Young, she's been on stage already talking about ICOs, what to look out for at 500 startups. Stacey Herbert, who you already know from Kaiser Report and from being on stage practically every other session today. And Matthew Getz, who is a cryptocurrency hedge fund founder of called Block Tower Capital. So the big question is, I mean, I'm the world's biggest skeptic here, so I'm the right person to chair this panel, because I'm guessing you guys are all pretty pro investing in cryptocurrency and ICO. So help me out, everyone, because we can have questions that you send in. So if you go to the app, you can send in questions. Make it tough on them. Ask them specific questions about specific IPOs and get them to give you a verdict. Let's start with cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies surged last year. At some point, Ethereum might start to rival Bitcoin. We might get the flippening. It's been fluctuating, but the ownership of cryptocurrency seems to be changing. Matthew, it seems like there's more short-term holders of things like Bitcoin now. Is it a good time to go in? A bad time to go in? Is it ever a bad time to go into Bitcoin?
So I think. First of all, we did plan our outfits, so this is a nice coincidence. I think the timing question is something that people pay a lot of attention to, but as with traditional markets, where I and some of my colleagues spent a lot of time, market timing's hard, it's difficult. Part of the reason we launched the firm is to say, you know, this is a space wrought with volatility, different types of risks, certainly lots of harebrained ideas and things you'd never want to touch, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go through the panel. But trying to specifically time something, I think is challenging. What you really want to do is prudently deploy capital into the space in a way that sort of takes the risks into consideration, which includes some new types of risks. You know, these things are operationally complex, they're hard to securely store. There's even new things that a lot of traditional investors don't think about, like the psychology of actually putting $1 of capital into a new space. You know, investors are used to getting compensated for taking different types of risk, whether it's beta or duration or illiquidity risk with the venture capital fund. Well, here you've got this new stuff, and you can be very well compensated for taking those risks, but you want to make sure that you're comfortable with them and you understand them first. And then once you are, it's just about sizing it appropriately. So whether Bitcoin's at level X, Y, or Z, I don't think is the primary consideration. I think it is more aligned to, from an overall portfolio standpoint, you can diversify away the volatility and the price volatility by sizing this appropriately alongside your other assets that you hold in the portfolio.
Howard, what do you think? Where are we going? Is the big surge finished now? Are we ready for another big surge? And what about some of the other cryptocurrencies?
I said I would talk last, but since you asked, I'm bullish. I talk my book. I'm pretty open about this. I'm long some Bitcoin. I'm long Ethereum. I own some Zcash. We're investors in Civic. So I'm very bullish on identity. I was an investor way back in LifeLock, which was kind of like Civic 1.0, the idea of like insurance to protect your identity. I think in this era of centralized power in the social networks, decentralization makes sense to me around identities. So in the United States, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage in the sense that it's mostly about speculation and investing, not about the core use cases, at least on a mass scale. You know, Americans have Venmo, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, all that works. Where I'm in agreement with the rest of the world is I mostly hate banks. We let them off the hook in 2008, and I joke today, we let them off the hook in 2008 only to let them speculate in crypto in 2018. So 10 years later, they're now getting a little bit of, you know, their speculative juices going and the freedom to invest in this space. So you have to be bullish. The banks are interested in this space. But I look at Bitcoin as so far my favorite in the sense that it's very much like a digital gold. If we look all the reasons that Bitcoin might have failed or should have failed and it hasn't failed, and the price still, right around $7,000 is pretty amazing, all things considered. So I don't know if it's for transactions, but I look at Bitcoin as more of a digital gold, and to me it makes more sense as gold than gold ever made. So I'm kind of excited about a digital gold. And if that's all that matters, if that's all that it becomes, that's still an incredible thing.
Okay. I would just build on that with one point. I think the digital gold analogy is really interesting. The store of value niche is arguably, the largest one that's going to be created through cryptocurrency. And as with a lot of new disruptive technologies, you can actually see the fundamental market structure change when something new is introduced. So one of the things that we've talked about is, the gold market, and is this a much better gold? Clearly it is, or it could be. But is there a bigger addressable market there? And one thing that many of you have probably heard is looking at something like the offshore banking system, which is $20 trillion. And here you have an asset that performs the same service as the Cayman and the Swiss bank accounts and the complex trust structures and the complex legal structures that not only are used by wealthy individuals, but also multinational corporations like Apple and Amazon and others who pay a lot of money in fees to Wall Street and banks to secure their assets and their cash in a way that's judgment resistant. Here you have an asset that does that, orders of magnitude better and cheaper, and is available to many more people around the world. Folks in rural India could have a Swiss bank in their pocket with this type of an asset.
I want to say, though, back in 2011, 2012, 2013, nobody knew Bitcoin was a store of value. It was still being debated back then, and I spent a lot of money on all sorts of crap in Bitcoin. 150 Bitcoin iPhone, which I thought was so amazing to order online, and that they sent it to me because nobody knew at that time that it was digital gold. We were still determining it.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things people don't know yet. It's still being debated as we speak. All the core engineers, people who are the smartest people in the world, and they still don't quite know what it is.
Well, at $7,000, it's gold more than it's transaction. So a lot of it is price. Price drives sentiment. I'm a trader for forever, and it doesn't matter if it's stocks or penny stocks or ICOs. Price drives sentiment, and as price rises, sentiment increases, and it becomes a store of value. If Bitcoin's at $100 in 2 weeks, people will be throwing them around again, using them as transactions to buy things.
Bitcoin has died hundreds of times. I've seen it crash 90%. Back in 2011, it went from $34 back down under $1. So it was, it's been before that, I was a silver investor, by the way. So I'm used to volatility, so it was kind of normal for me. But it is very volatile.
So let's talk about ICOs a minute. We've got quite a few questions coming in. I'll struggle to get through all of them. But one question is, what steps are being taken within the ICO industry to protect small-scale investors who aren't deemed professional or eligible in regulated markets? Edith, can we bring you in? Because I'm a huge skeptic of the ICO market. I mean, surely we're looking at 95, 99, 99.9% of these companies are going to fall to zero in value, right?
Yeah, so earlier in my presentation, I sort of talked about that 10 things in terms of ICO project that I look for.
You said there are a lot of shit coins out there.
There's many shit coins, and of course Kanye coin, then Trump coin, and definitely waiting for Kim coin for sure. But there are now, I feel like I'm very lazy, right? So because 99.9% are all scam, obviously, and many of these protocols are still, don't really have a product per se. A lot of times I always actually start with people, what are their background and whatever they're trying to do, which you sort of mentioned. I think actually in Asia there's quite a few interesting use cases, like real blockchain use cases that I don't see in the US. Mostly because there are use cases where you think about things like Alipay or WeChat Pay would never happen in the US because there's no infrastructure to begin with in China. That's why things like that will actually happen. And these days I see a lot of, actually for the last 2 weeks, a lot of gaming focus. Almost folks want to build the 0x for gaming industry, avoid fraud. A lot of very interesting in terms of virtual goods, and you can argue that you need blockchain or not, but there are really legit teams with good understanding of blockchain are building some of these protocols. So always team is the most important. And then obviously looking at the white paper, looking at do they actually have some real code on GitHub? Is there interesting social media following that all could be fake too? But there are definitely lists of things, as I mentioned earlier, that is like a checklist for us when we evaluate ICO projects.
So last week, Block.one raised $4 billion in an ICO. They're already at about $10 billion raised so far this year. Stacey, this is just market hype, isn't it? How long can it go on for? I mean, we can't go on like this forever.
It depends. For me personally, I think a lot of it is kind of scammy and or just people looking to raise money easily. Some of them I think of as kind of like just a Kickstarter. You're just giving money. You're not really like wanting a hat back or whatever. You're just like, okay, it'll be interesting if you could build that Oculus. Like here's some money. In terms, I do look, however, at certain platforms, and as she was saying that when you have to look at the tech team, because there aren't that many, there aren't 1,800 genius engineers, and yet there are 1,800 coins. So you look at the tech team, we've been around for a long time, so we know a lot of the early engineers, anybody who was involved in the early Bitcoin engineering and code and commitments, then you know they can kind of be trusted. But EOS and platforms like that, I'm personally more excited about in terms of ICOs. If you're going to do an ICO, I want it to be something that I'm interested in and want to use, like smart contracts and second layer developments and things like that. But in terms of people just looking for money for a project that doesn't really need a blockchain,
Yeah.
I think of it more like a Kickstarter. And if you want to give them some money, go ahead. But
Yeah. So Matthew, here's a question for you. How can you operate a cryptocurrency hedge fund when the entire market is so dominated by Bitcoin, meaning any realistic diversity is impossible? How can you?
Well, without commenting on kind of what we're doing or the firm, when you think about the market, there's this concept of Bitcoin dominance, which has come down over the years, and that means just Bitcoin's percentage of the total market cap or network value, whatever term you prefer. And I think with that, you're starting to see some differentiation, certainly with a lot of overhyped ideas and harebrained ideas that shouldn't and don't justify any valuation, even approximating what you see listed on coinmarketcap.com. Those things won't be sustainable long term. So there is differentiation you can achieve. Certainly diversification here does not play the same role that we tend to see in traditional markets. So a lot of these things tend to move in step with each other. Some are higher beta than others in terms of the magnitude of those moves, but then that's both to the upside and the downside. But the reality is there's unusual sort of opportunity in a market like this where it is so blue ocean, where market regimes shift as rapidly as they do here, and you have sort of the kind of behavioral finance market psychology element on top of that from this fragmented market from a liquidity standpoint and a participant standpoint that allows you to make sort of different sort of bets and investments along different axes and investment strategies. So thinking about what are different sort of professional investment strategies from early stage investing to active trading to kind of thematic long positions and things that you like fundamentally. You can take different approaches to capture opportunity and importantly, manage risk. So I like to think about things in terms of alpha and beta. Here, there's a beta tailwind that you probably couldn't avoid even if you wanted to. It's very powerful. Plus, many of us believe in that. I'm a former engineer before spending a bunch of years at Goldman Sachs. So I believed in that beta tailwind. I wouldn't want to avoid it even if I could. But augmenting that with sort of what I call the alpha of this unusual opportunity that this market presents is pretty interesting. And that spans the various coins and assets that are in the market itself.
Okay, let's talk briefly about blockchain technologies and the early stage and kind of what future you see in them. What do you think, Howard? Are you a fan?
Listen, like I said, I think it goes back to the fact that we are in the first bear market for crypto. So we've talked about 90%. You could talk about all the 90% pullbacks before. This is the first time where globally people, as a brand, Bitcoin is globe, corner to corner of the world, people have heard the term get Bitcoin, and as much as people may not own it yet, we're in a global bear market. It's the first time that Bitcoin as a global brand has been in it's down 60% from its highs. So this is a little different than the last price pullbacks. There's coins distributed everywhere. People have access to information. We have Twitter, Reddit, we have Telegram, we have all these ways to communicate, to prevent ourselves getting defrauded, yet we're still getting defrauded. So that what makes crypto as exciting is a global speculation platform. When you could trade, not everybody can trade Facebook even today around the world 24/7, but Bitcoin you can. So there are this is what's exciting about the technology. The fact that Bitcoin is opening the idea that why can't I trade $50 worth of Facebook at midnight, on a Sunday? Okay, so this is what's great about crypto and Bitcoin and technology. It's forcing us to look at stuff and go, that was stupid. Why do we have to be at the whims of traders in New York? And why can't I have fractional ownership of all kinds of assets? So that's what excites me as an investor about crypto, and I don't want to pick any specific winners, because the winner is all of us in the fact that the technology is pushing banks and everybody to accept all the things that make sense.
Can we just jump back to ICOs a second? There's a question that's come in for you, Edith. Which token from Hagen, which token class would you prefer to invest in, utility or equity token? One word answer.
Sorry.
No, I wanted to hear.
Okay,
For me, it's utility. I own some Civic. I own some Binance. I own some Zcash. So utility for me about use cases. I'm not super bullish. I'm just riding trends that I feel I'm buying certain dips. But I don't have any specific insight other than I like utility over security.
Yeah, so for now, for us, we're still a U.S. fund, so we can't really invest in any equity. So we're definitely looking for utility token. And in fact, as I mentioned, most of the ICO project, by the way, don't accept U.S. nor Chinese investor anyway. And sometimes many of these tokens also pretend, but they're all ERC20, but they're borderline securities. So we obviously evaluate case by case.
Sometimes I break it out. There's three big buckets that sometimes is a helpful framing for people. You have utility tokens, which we were just talking about, which are enabling some new use case or market. You have security tokens and tokenized assets, which I think you guys heard about on a previous panel, and we mentioned briefly, which have an underlying asset that has some sort of value. And then the third bucket that I think about is where I put things like Bitcoin and similar, which are much more commodity-like, both in terms of how they behave, the addressable markets, supply-demand sort of driving it, this concept of reflexivity and things becoming more valuable the more people believe it is and use it as such. And people ask, what's the fundamental value of something like that? Well, it really is best thought of more like a commodity in terms of how it behaves. Those are the three big buckets, and I think there's interesting opportunities across all three.
So I guess the question if it is like, I just want to start out $10,000, don't have any experience, what would be your suggestion?
If you're just starting out, I would say Bitcoin is really, and I think also Bitcoin, the second layer and third layers that are coming on this year and are being developed, I think it could disrupt the entire, altcoin market as well. We'll see, but I think that could be something to look forward to.
Okay, well, we're out of time, so let's do one last thing. Matthew can't do this because he's restricted on what he can say, but we're going to do thumbs up, thumbs down for whatever I say. So come on, hands out. Come on, guys. Thumbs up, thumbs down. So, Bitcoin? Ethereum?
Hey. What?
Ripple? EOS? Okay, ICOs. Tron?
Never heard of it.
Ontology?
Ontology.
What is it?
Telegram? Okay, and there we have it. All right, well, thanks, folks. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.